We're about the rare case when someone that's a prosecutor doesn't do what they're supposed to do to notify a victim, give them a chance to be heard, and make sure the law is complied with. Well, what's the problem? The problem is right now the law that we have, which we refer to as the Victim's Bill of Rights, simply doesn't have any teeth in it and doesn't have an enforcement mechanism for those times when a victim has a right to be heard and he or she is not heard. That's the problem that needs to be fixed. This bill does two things. Number one, it elevates victims' rights in this state to a constitutional status. What we have right now is, by statute, and a pretty good Bill of Rights for victims by statute. But we need it in the Constitution. And we need, number two, a way to have some accountability so that when, in fact, the folks don't do it right, in the rare occasion when the prosecutor doesn't do what he or she is supposed to do, there is a way for the victim to stand up and say, wait a minute, I deserve to be heard. I deserve to be heard, and I deserve to be present. So what rights are we going to give victims in this state, and do so by Constitution? It's 4 enumerated rights, and folks, it's really just 3, because one of them just says they have a right to be informed of their rights. It is, number 1, the right to be treated with fairness, respect, and dignity. That victims have the right to be treated with fairness, respect, and dignity. Number 2, the right to reasonable and accurate notice of proceedings involving the delinquent act. Number 3, the right to be present and be heard. And number 4, the right to be informed of these rights. Those are not anything that any of us should have any concern with, because those principles are already embodied in the Victim's Bill of Rights. So we're not adding anything to it. We're simply elevating and letting victims know and letting society know that we value victims' rights and we find it so important. We're going to put it in our Constitution, just like where the accused rights are when they're a criminal defendant. Their rights are found in the Constitution. Why not the victims as well? Some of the representative of PAC then wanted to strike the word for damages, which left us with this language that said there shall be no cause of action. So it's a paragraph B that paragraph A gives victims rights, constitutional rights in 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then paragraph B says, and you have no cause of action, which means you have no right, no way to assert them. Completely nonsensical. Yes, it is nonsensical. But that's been the strategy of some of the representatives of PAC all along to try to defeat this bill by inserting language that made sure that victims do not have the right to assert the very constitutional rights that I think everybody in this chamber agrees that victims deserve in this state. Well, let's talk about the 2 philosophical drivers behind what we're doing. Number 1 is that we ought to elevate victims' rights to the Constitution. I've only heard one person in this chamber tell me that they don't think that's appropriate. Everyone else has told me they think that's appropriate. And if you do, then the only question is as to number 2. The purpose of this is to have some accountability. To have a way for a victim whose rights are not honored, in those rare instances, that they have a way to enforce their rights. That's all it's about. The representatives of PAC have done what they can in not a forthright manner to suggest to you and to suggest to the DAs and suggest to the sheriffs around this state that this is going to create a parade of horribles of all sorts of suits and equity. And there's simply no basis to believe that. There's no reasonable basis to believe that. But that's what they've done, so we've had to deal with it. And it all goes back to the fact that that position by the representatives of PAC do not want accountability. If folks are telling you that they're against this law, they need to come tell this body in the state of Georgia the reason a prosecutor is giving them for elevating in the example of where something doesn't go right. Why would you elevate that person's own employees or themselves because of a mistake above the level of the rights of the victim? Folks, these victims are crying out for our help. And the most moving thing that I've had happen since I started working on this are meeting the people after the committee hearing and the people that have come down to this court, to this Capitol, and hug my neck out on the ropes. But you know what? There's not a thing that anybody in this chamber or this Capitol can do to help those people, because it's already happened to them. They were victimized not only by the criminal, but the process let them down because they didn't have their rights and they couldn't have enforced them anyway, the way it is currently. So they're down here for what reason? Because you and I can't do a thing for them. They're down here, why? Because they don't want the horror of what's happened to them to happen to me, you, or anybody else in this state. Bridget Flowers had been beaten unconscious by her husband in a Walmart in Macon on Valentine's Day, February of 2014. Jacinto Flowers was arrested but released on a no-contact bond the next morning, in spite of the fact that he was on parole at the time of the assault. No one told Bridget about the bond hearing, so she was not present and not informed of her rights as a victim. After 8 days of being released, Jacinto murdered Bridget in front of her daughter and son. Y'all think this is important? I do. Y'all think this deserves to be in our Constitution? I do. You think if we're going to give victims rights in this state, that they ought to be able to enforce them when they're trampled upon? I do, and I sincerely hope you do.